On this week's FarrCast, Michael welcomes Dr. Jay Bryson for a deep look at the economy. Jay tells us recession risks are rising, but elevated risk doesn't mean likely. Dan Mahaffee parses the possibility of a government shutdown, and we kick it all off with Jim Iuorio on the markets. He tells us anyone getting greedy right now is probably making a mistake. And finally, we will touch on the third rail of the controversy that is Kenny Polcari's footwear. And ask, what would Sinatra wear? But now, let's get this week's FarrCast started. And here's your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome to the FarrCast. I am Michael Farr. Thanks so much for joining us this week. It's the 25th day of September. We have just very few days here left in this third quarter of 2025. Earnings will start coming out here in a couple of weeks, and I hope they will provide sufficient distraction away from all of the other noise, but somehow I doubt it with a political shutdown, government shutdown looming. Perhaps looks like it'll get kicked down the road until we get to about Thanksgiving time. Markets are still trading near all-time highs. The imbalance of the Mag 7 has returned. So this is a very concentrated market, and my market commentary this week that's going out today is actually doing the math and showing you the numbers of why this is such a concentrated market, and that there's still probably opportunity in the other 493 names that have well underperformed those Mag 7. Now, when markets are trading at all-time highs, people start looking at ratios, and if you look at 24 times earnings and maybe even slightly higher, you can hear my friend Jim Lebenthal telling you that, it's only 22 times next year's, or 22 and a half times. 22 and a half times next year's multiple is a stupidly high multiple, for God's sakes. 14 times was always the benchmark when we were young. And I don't mean 14 years old, I mean 30. So that was the benchmark. If you were 14 or below, you felt pretty safe. But the long-term average prior to the 2003, 4, 5 run was 14. It got to 16, and now people are saying, "Oh, we're fine at 22," adding on debt at $2 trillion a year, and this argument going on with interest rates and tariffs and all of this other stuff. I'm not making a political comment. I'm just telling you it's got a lot of uncertainty in there, and you've got a bunch of stuff making new highs. And the cash and dividend ratios and the Buffett indicator, they're all as high as they've been in years and years and years. So will a continued Fed rate cut save markets? I don't know. Not if prices continue to go up. So caution, please, ladies and gentlemen, caution. And when you talk to people who have a lot of experience in the markets, they're going to tell you, one, this thing is due to pull back. It's absolutely due to pull back. With any exogenous event, you get a real correction. And maybe it won't happen because it hasn't. And maybe the new generation of investor has been trained to buy every dip, because we haven't had a wallop in years. And by wallop, I mean the 1987 wallop. I mean the 2000 wallop. I mean the 2008 and 2009 wallop, where we're down for over a year and you're looking at prices 20% lower, and doom and gloom fill the air. When they're down 20% and staying there, nobody's going, "Well, I think it looks good." No, because you sound like an idiot. There'll be a few of us, I promise, because I've always been that guy. When it goes down 20%, I just say, "Look, it's down 20%. I know it feels awful, but this is what you got to do." I say it. People don't want to listen. Jim Iuorio, a partner at TJM Institutional Services, somebody who's almost as old as I am, but he's been doing this a long time professionally. Welcome back, Jim.
Thank you, brother.
Okay, you heard my rant. I want to talk to you. I heard you and Kenny Polcari got into it. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm very worried about this Kenny Polcari shoe crisis.
The shoe incident, the great shoe incident. No, what you're saying, I think, is really important. I think anyone who's getting greedier right now is doing the wrong thing, and I'm certainly not. Now, we're in September, up through middle of October, as you know, the seasonally weakest time of the year. So I thought if somewhat of a corrective phase was going to start, it was going to start relatively soon. Well, it hasn't. But all I did to prepare for that, by the way, is just increase put protection and stay. We always talk about on this show, you said, what should Fred and Ethel do? We have a saying in the trading world, as you know it, is that bulls can make money, bears can make money, but pigs get slaughtered. And what I mean by that is that when you get too greedy, when you let it all ride, that's when the problems start. So if you're looking at your ratios now and you've rode this bull run, you had these Mag 7, and you've made quite a bit of money, do I think you're supposed to take some off the table? Yes, I do think you're supposed to take some off the table. That being said, you mentioned those 22% multiples compared to 14. I think it is a different paradigm, and I think that different paradigm is about the activist Fed and the fact that they just want to throw liquidity into the market. We have so much extra money sloshing around this system than we have in the past. By my estimation, probably close to $3 trillion that is looking for homes. That's probably what's pushed multiples up a bit. So is the Fed is lowering rates with 2.7% inflation. So it seems to me that they don't care to run 2.7% for the next couple of years. And if that's the case, I wouldn't want to be out of things like stock. So I'm not a bear. I'm just a little bit cautious if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And yeah, you do have to kind of stop and say, what's different this time? Why are we up here? Why are we staying up here? Is it all the debt? And Jim, if it is all this debt creation, meaning if we're shoving $2 trillion plus a year into this economy, you can keep it alive for a long time, but it's like spending on your credit card. One of these days, doesn't it have to catch up with us? And
Yes.
one of these days, doesn't this get to be a problem?
Okay, but let's put things in perspective. In December of 1996, when Alan Greenspan gave the irrational exuberant speech, you know what happened after that. The NASDAQ rallied almost 300% in the next couple of years before it hit the top and broke apart. Yet on Tuesday of this week, Jerome Powell gives a speech where he says fairly highly valued, which I think the market kind of drew a line to irrational exuberance. But what does that mean? It means nothing. Saying that we are due for a correction and that we are fundamentally stretched literally means nothing, because it can go on a lot longer than you can stay solvent. Thank you. Is that Keynes or
Keynes.
Friedman? Yeah, Keynes. But anyway, so and that's the reality of it. So you have to then rely on rebalancing. And you guys, people who are fundamental investors don't really look at technical analysis, but technical analysis is what really is going to give the tell. And right now it is given no tell yet, above all the moving averages and trending higher.
And trending higher. If the Fed is not necessarily cutting rates, as Powell has indicated, but rather sort of doing an adjustment in policy to get it more normalized. I love that word, more normalized.
Me too.
And they're talking about, 2 more cuts this year, one in 26 and one in 27. That's a percentage point, full percentage point over the next few years. Maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't. But it's not going to accommodative. It's not going to stimulus. It's the kind of adjustment to normalize. They're not trying to get anything moving, according to Powell. I'm not sure I believe him, and I'm not sure if you cut a point from a 4% handle that 25% basic cut doesn't really have an impact. What do you think? And then we got to go.
Yeah, I don't think that 25 basis point cut that they began with has any impact at all. And I think it has to be 75 to 100 basis points before it starts to make a material difference. But the one thing to watch, and this is important, and I hope I explain it properly, is when we start cutting in earnest on the short end, keep an eye on the 10-year. If 10-year yields start heading higher, that will mean to me, well, it could mean a couple things, but the one thing I think it means is that we are worried about inflation. Now, we being worried about inflation and not wanting to hold bonds seems now different than the Fed being worried about inflation, because they don't seem to be. I think he thinks that supply side solutions are coming in 2026. But I think that by 100 basis points was early in 2026, then actually could have some material effect on the economy. So far, no.
You think he's wrong then? You think the Fed should be more concerned than they are, it sounds like. And are you these?
No.
You talk about a supply side solution, you're talking about AI?
Yes, AI combined with deregulation that's coming down the pipe as well, hopefully. I actually kind of agree.
Deregulation of what, Jim?
Well, Trump ran on deregulating the energy industry, regulating some of the banking industry, allowing them to loan money a little more easily, get rid of some of the friction. If we're really doing that, again, just look at small business optimism when Trump took over. The corporate sector feels that Trump has their back. Now, they need some real live evidence of that, but the confidence is something that's good. And it could be that they start producing more and do the Stephen Moore, Larry Kudlow, handle it from the supply side inflation thing.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Let's go back to Jim's first part of his message. Ladies and gentlemen, stocks have appreciated enormously. Some of the valuations are at nosebleed levels. So it is time to take a look at the level of risk in your portfolio,
Bingo.
talk with your advisors, and make sure that your level of risk is appropriate for you, because I'm betting it has crept in and it's time to take the risk out. And my friend Don Hayes, years and years, said every time you do something important in the market, you should be in a full body sweat. It should feel that bad. You're going to go ahead and trim one of these Mag 7 stocks and sell positions of it while it's going through the roof. And tomorrow it's going to be higher, and you're going to say, oh, I'm an idiot. You're not an idiot. You're de-risking, and you're being disciplined, and you're following your discipline in a dispassionate way. That's what you're supposed to do. That's how long-term investors make money. Iuorio has rules. Farr has rules. Polcari has rules. And we keep ourselves in this game for this many decades because we follow our rules and we don't follow the winds of emotion that continue to blow you around. Final word, Iuorio. We're going, and I love you. You're great to be on today. Oh, you know what? I'm
Amen.
going to get Polcari on. I want to hear from Polcari. Hang on.
Go, go.
No, go ahead. Harry will get him.
No, because greed is what sinks the ships. And I think you hit it right on the head. I'm just going to give you an amen times 2.
All right. Jim Iuorio, TJM Institutional Securities, and the voice and face of the Chicago Exchange. Thanks, Jim. We're going to be back with Mahaffee. Please stay with us.
I went to Maria. I sat behind a desk. Nobody knew what I was wearing until I met Scott Bessent. Then they took the picture. Right?
I think you look fabulous.
About wearing the sneakers, and they go, well, Jimmy Iuorio said, I go, really? Listen, as far as I'm concerned, I'm 64. I've been doing this for 44 years. I'm entitled to wear what I want.
There's no question about it. Or as little as you want, like now.
Or as little as I want. Right now, I'm wearing very little.
Thanks for being with us on Season 9 of the FarrCast. And now, political analyst Dan Mahaffee and your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. Joining me now, as he does every week, here we are in Season 9 with Dan Mahaffee, president of the Dr. Scholl Foundation, scholar at the Washington think tank Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, and our senior political analyst on the FarrCast. Welcome back, Dan.
Good morning, Michael. How are you doing?
I'm doing just great. Thank you very much. We're glad to see you, Dan.
Yes.
We have, of course, as always, lots and lots and lots going on. Let's start, if we can, with the government shutdown that is seemingly not going to happen because they're going to vote for the continuing resolution thing that takes us through. And Trump's just stonewalling all of the Democrats. The Democrats are screaming bloody murder, and he doesn't care, and the Republicans don't care, and we're not going to deal with this till November. Why is that a good strategy?
Yeah, well, we had to start somewhere, so let's start with that. Government shutdown. Of course, we're looking at this, and I think each side looked at what we're arguing about. Look, this is a short-term extension just to get us to Thanksgiving and buy some time to get the deal done, to get a budget for the next year in place. So what do you see in these negotiations? One, there's two messages coming from Republicans. The first is, look, plenty of times during the Biden administration, we've done these short-term deals. This isn't a major sticking point. We crossed the aisle to do these before, so it's fair that you do this again. And look, these are numbers that are continuing. They're largely agreed to previously. Don't use this as an unnecessary leverage point. So that first message, I think, is largely a very valid one, and I think one that is why you'll see some type of short-term deal take place. Now, the president's stonewalling, look, for a person who's the art of the deal, is there an effort to do this? Yes, I think there's some of that to stonewall them to perhaps get to this further deal, but I also really see no appetite from this administration to want to get to the deal or work it out, unless you're seeing that this rhetoric that we heard about, massive job cuts to the federal workforce, unless that was just sort of negotiating bluster. I think the way they're approaching this, though, is really not boding well for negotiations around the holidays once we get past this extension, which, as you say, looks likely, because again, there's that precedent of we put in a short-term extension to get a deal done. Don't use it as a negotiating leverage point.
I think that we're going to watch this play out pretty much exactly the way you just said, and it could get ugly, could it not, by the time we get to November? Or does everybody just have to ultimately buckle to President Trump at this point? I've never seen a president this powerful before, Dan. Will they buckle?
I don't think they buckle in the sense, at least on Democrats, because they can't buckle any further. And for them, buckling on this would basically be the dismantling of the Affordable Care Act, at least from its financial footings and how it's funded. So,
Does it go to shutdown? Because I don't see President Trump meeting him halfway.
I don't see him meeting them halfway unless he starts to see that this, again, the healthcare message, does that resonate at a time, look, when the big, beautiful bill, as they call it, is still underwater, the closure of rural hospitals is increasingly in the headlines. Do they do it simply because the narrative changes by November? That I put out, Michael, as the only circumstance where you do see that negotiation take place.
And we know, ladies and gentlemen, that we're talking about 2 months, and 2 months is a lifetime in politics. Lots can change in 2 months in politics. Dan, rhetoric from the United Nations speeches against Russia and President Putin in support of Ukraine and President Zelensky seem to be a bit of a turn. And then out of nowhere, the White House comes out and says, oh, these are negotiating tactics. Well, didn't the White House just undermine everything the president just said and say, okay, well, but you don't really have to listen to all that stuff he just said?
Yeah, look, I think one, it does show that the president's frustration level with Putin is continuing to rise. But we always say, what is that point that it does actually change the outcomes? And look, rhetoric is rhetoric, especially when it's undercut by his own White House later that day. Look, there are two things I say in that message that we saw that long social media post. One, if his mindset has at least changed to that there can be Ukrainian success in this, that is a positive, at least from a perhaps the president's strategic viewpoint of how he's seeing the world. But ultimately, too, I think it says that he's really trying to wash his hands of this and hand it over to the Europeans. And the rhetoric you see at the end of, well, that NATO can certainly go and get the weaponry, do what it needs, but also in the way he's saying that, is he taking off some of the restrictions? You know, could the Ukrainians now use some of this to strike further into Russia, to hit more strategic targets? If he's saying, you know, now it's up to you to just do with it. We'll sell it to you. We're not going to give it to you, to be clear. We'll sell it to you, but then once we've sold it to you, do with it as you wish.
Or sell it to Poland and other NATO countries and have them pass it over to the Ukraine, and then we're, I guess, our fingerprints aren't on it the same. Former President Medvedev from Russia said, "Don't worry about Trump. He'll always come back to us. He likes us. He's just having a little bit of a rant, and he'll come right back as something of a kind and more gentle lapdog." He dismissed all of the paper tiger warnings and everything. What do you think about Russia coming back in that way, going at Trump personally, suggesting that that's what he's going to do?
Mm-hmm. Look, I think they're playing more to a global audience, goading him like that. They want to be seen. You know, I think this is, how is this being seen in Beijing, New Delhi, other places? Who are the jibes and jaunts going back and forth between is as much important as the audience to be seen. So I think, though, that the Russians play a dangerous game with such rhetoric, particularly given that it doesn't serve well at a time when many of these decisions on national security come down to the commander in chief himself.
So, any change after the UN speeches and everything else? Do you think there's change there, or is this more negotiating?
I think you see change, at least in how the Europeans move on terms of their industrial and weapons purchases and growth. They still have a lot to overcome. I don't see much real change. I think, as we've seen with the president, is this just another, another one of those 2 week deadlines? It's always rhetoric until we see a change in action. But I think the administration, as we've talked about this, and you read between the lines on other stories, a lot of it comes down to the fact that they frankly feel stretched thin between what they want to do counter narcotics in the Western Hemisphere, as well as their concerns about planning for war in East Asia, Taiwan, that area.
This rhetoric, though, feels different from the rhetoric where he doesn't want to talk to Democrats about the budget. That doesn't seem to be negotiable, and it doesn't sound like he's going to change an inch off of that, mostly because he doesn't have to. But the Russian rhetoric, Ukrainian rhetoric, that sounds like something that's still being created and in motion. All right, Dan, what else are you looking at, to the extent that the administration seems to be able to guide us away from focus on Israel? They're doing it, but there are a lot of, all of a sudden, other seemingly very reasonable allies recognizing a Palestinian state. What does all of that mean? And is that high on your list of things you're looking at? And by the way, what happened to that Panama Canal thing that we just haven't heard anything about? That was
yeah. Look, on the Israel thing and the recognition of Palestine, all of that is largely symbolic. And until you have like a meaningful negotiating partner on either side, and look, you have the Palestinian Authority, which is there, but largely a corrupt edifice and hollowed out bureaucracy in many ways. What do you have with the of course, we've talked about the Israeli government's position, and ultimately, I think it's a symbolic measure that may, in fact, be counterproductive in how it hardens the position of the Israeli government and then encourages those in the cabinet, particularly on the far right, to push for things like further annexation of territory, takeover of the Gaza Bank, things like that. So I don't think, West Bank or Gaza Strip, I don't see it really doing much to actually help the Palestinians other than symbolically and diplomatically.
Okay. And the number one concern on your list, anything keeping you awake at night? You're in Boston this morning. You're going to be in Washington soon here. Tell us what is really, anything keeping you up at night, and then we got to go.
No, I think what still keeps me up at night, as always, is supply chains, Michael. What's the disruptions that could happen in Asia if we have conflict, what we see in the Middle East, all these things, just the global hotspots. I know it's not a good
conflicts in Asia.
I'm expecting a sense of instability. So do you see more things like blockades around Taiwan, measures like that, things that could actually affect trade in the region? Yes.
You think we're going to then?
Yeah, especially as China tries to see how they can push us, particularly too if these trade negotiations start to go south.
Dan Mahaffee from the Dr. Scholl Foundation, our senior political analyst on the FarrCast. Thank you, Dan, very much. Hey, coming up, Dr. Jay Bryson, former chief economist at Wells Fargo, talking about what the Fed is doing, isn't doing. Are they on the right track? We're going to find out when we come back on the FarrCast. Please stay with us.
Michael Farr and the FarrCast are proud to support Heroes, Inc. Heroes supports the spouses and children of law enforcement officers and firefighters who gave their lives in the line of duty to the greater Washington, D.C. community. Their singular goal is to honor the supreme sacrifice made by these individuals by caring for their families. Heroes' work begins within 24 hours of the tragic loss and continues indefinitely. We invite you to learn more about Heroes' mission at heroes.org. We hope that you will consider supporting Heroes as they endeavor to honor those who protect us. That's heroes.org. Heroes, here for you, here for good. And now, back to the FarrCast and your host, Michael Farr. Thank you for joining us on the FarrCast. And now, back to your host, Michael Farr.
Welcome back to the FarrCast. I'm Michael Farr. Terrific FarrCast this morning. Jim Iuorio and then Dan Mahaffee with a little bit of Kenny Polcari silliness. What's not silly is my next guest, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. J. Bryson, former chief economist at Wells Fargo, worked at the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. for years, a PhD economist, and my great friend and one of the smartest guys we ever get to talk to. Hey, welcome back, Jay.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me again. Appreciate it.
We appreciate it a lot, and we always learn so much whenever you're on. Jay, let's start with the very basics this morning. Is the economy in good shape, or are you worried?
The economy is in good shape. How worried am I? So let's quantify it. So if you look at since the Second World War, the U.S. economy has been in recession roughly 15% of the time. So that's your underlying run rate, right? About roughly 15. You know, if you ask me right now, what do you think the probability of a recession is in, say, the next 12 months, knowing what I know right now today, I'd give you 1 in 3 odds, right? So it's not my base case, but I would also say its probability of recession is somewhat elevated given the fact that there's still a lot of uncertainty in the economy. I mean, we're in a no hire, no fire sort of economy. And I don't think it would take much of a shock at this point to potentially cause a modest downturn.
Okay, modest. So the modest chance of a downturn at this point. I said at the beginning of the FarrCast today that stocks were very, very expensive, that the Buffett ratio is as pricey as it's been in, a decade or more. Things are high. We're at over 24 times earnings now. On trailing 12, we're 22 point something times next year's earnings. By any measure, this is really high. And my advice to investors, and Jim Iuorio agreed, is that investors have to look at their risk parameters. And whatever their normal risk profile is, they need to make sure that they are within that risk profile, because it's likely, given the run in these Magnificent Seven stocks and the market with these PE multiples, that they could have more risk in their portfolio than they're comfortable having, and that according to their plan, they need to take some of that risk out. So with a market that's a bit precarious in terms of valuations, do you think the Fed, therefore, at a time where you've got a 33.33% chance of a recession at some point being caused by something, because we are okay but fragile, is the way I'm interpreting what you said about the economy. Okay but fragile. Is the Fed getting this right?
So I think so. So they cut rates by 25 basis points back, a week or so ago. I think the risk at this point are starting to skew a little bit more towards weakness in the labor market. That's what the data are showing us right now. There's over the last, I think it's 3 months, on average, we've created roughly only 30,000 jobs per month. And so, if that were to turn, if you start to go negative, that's just the definition of recession, right? That's how it feeds on itself. And so I think the risks are starting to move in that direction, but I don't think that the Fed wants to be cutting dramatically at this point. Certainly not by the 200 basis points or so that the president is talking about, because there's still a risk of inflation here. Now, we haven't seen a tremendous amount of inflation, partly because what's happening is you're seeing goods prices accelerate, but what we're seeing is services, which is roughly 2/3 of the CPI, those still remain pretty tame at this point. And so, it's not like we're having double-digit inflation or anything like that. But, fast forward a few months, and you could see some higher inflation at this point. So, long story short here, Michael, I think the Fed is doing it right. They are slowly feeling their way to where they think they need to be, but they're not doing it in a dramatic fashion. And they're kind of walking on a tightrope right now. Because
okay, so do you agree? I mean, are they getting it right? Is this what you would be doing if you were chairman?
Yeah, I think yes, it would be. Just because look, they're walking a tightrope right now in the sense of what's happening in the economy. Things are moving in two different directions as it relates to their two mandates. Right, one is full quote full employment, and the unemployment rate's now at 4.3%. It's the highest it's been in a few years. So that would argue for you to be easing policy. On the other hand, you get inflation at best stalling out at 3%. Maybe it's going to start to edge up a little bit at this point. That argues for not cutting rates, if anything, maybe tightening policy. So they're really caught between a rock and a hard place at this point. And I think they are getting it right by saying, okay, we think the risks are more skewed now towards labor market weakness, but that could definitely change in the next few months if you do start to see the effects of tariffs really start to show up.
What you just heard Dr. Bryson say, my friends, is one, he got to the Harry Truman on the one hand and on the other hand. That's always good. You always get an economist to do that. That's how you know they're real economists, by the way. And he then said, as I listened to you, Jay, that you, if you were on the Fed, would really have to be more data dependent and see what comes your way. And the Fed's been very clear always that they can't make decisions based on what they think may happen. They have to look at the data. They have to see what's actually happening so that keeps their emotions out of it, keeps their expectations, keeps basically their emotional expectations. And everybody has a theory. And you can't run economic policy, monetary policy on your theories. You have to see the numbers. Is that fair, Jay? And if there were one thing you could change with what's going on, what would it be?
I think the thing that I would change, and this kind of relates to the Fed and its data dependency right now. It's looking like we may have a government shutdown, in another week. And if that happens, a lot of those statistical agencies will be mothballed for a while. I mean, if this thing goes on for a number of weeks, you're not going to be getting data on employment. You're not going to be getting data on prices. And the Fed's going to be kind of flying a little bit blind. So if there's anything I could change right now, it would be don't have a government shutdown. And B, what is happening is there's been a lot of cutbacks at the statistical agencies. And we just saw a delay of the annual consumer expenditure survey because largely of some of those cutbacks before. I would be putting more money into those agencies, which have been starved for funds over the last number of years, rather than cutting back at this point.
So, Jay, is there a suggestion in there that perhaps a government shutdown, letting the government shut down, could serve President Trump's, the administration's agenda of wanting the Fed to do more quickly? I mean, letting everything kind of languish might pressure the future data to a position that the Fed would have to respond more?
Well, no, actually, I think if you have a government shutdown and the Fed is flying blind, I don't think that pressures them to do more. If anything, it kind of keeps them on hold at that point. Now, the way it would move the Fed to be cutting rates is, let's say this thing goes on for like a month or so. And so if you go back to 2018-19, we had a government shutdown back then. It started in the late 2018, spilled over into 2019. And the BEA estimates that over the course of that month shutdown or so, that sliced GDP, that took about 0.4 percentage points off of GDP growth over that period of time. And so if you have a long government shutdown here, that will definitely affect the economy in the short run. Now, it wouldn't take much of a shock to put the economy into recession. If you have a long extended government shutdown and it slows the economy down even more, it could start to feed on itself. So then that's how you get the Fed to really start to move, later on, when if things are starting to really slow down, slash move into a recession.
The 10-year Treasury yield is 4.17 this morning. Gold has been a stellar investment category. gotten above $3,800 an ounce, but now it's 37 and change. Morgan Stanley came out earlier in this week, or maybe it was last week, and there's a suggestion they might go to a different recommended sort of base case asset allocation from being 60-40, 60% equities, 40 in bonds, to 60-20-20. 60% equities, 20% bonds, 20% gold. That suggests to me an inflationary future, or a view for an inflationary future, higher gold. And do you think Morgan Stanley is barking up the right tree? Would this make any sense to you?
Well, so first of all, I'm not an investment strategist, right? So, I'm not sure about, where underlying valuations are. And I mean, I think the story is you're a little bit more worried about inflation here. I could see you wanting to pare back your allocation to bonds, in that situation, because in an inflationary sort of situation, bonds typically underperform there. The gold scenario, it's a different sort of story, but if central banks around the world continue to move into gold, maybe you want to piggyback on that right there. So yeah, I think that there's a potential for inflation out there. Now, is it being caused by tariffs? That's a one-off price level adjustment, right? The tariffs go on, prices go up as you move from point A to point B. You have the inflation there. Once you get to point B, assuming you don't double down again with higher inflations, the price level should stop rising. But what you worry about is inflation expectations starting to become entrenched. People start to say, okay, I've seen this inflation. I think it's going to be even higher. So they're going forward, or I'm fearful it might be higher going forward. Therefore, I'm going to go out and buy a car right now before its prices go up by another 10%. If everyone does that, guess what happens? The price goes up by 10%, right? So what you really want to make sure here is inflation expectations don't become entrenched. And that's where the Fed comes in by running a tighter monetary policy to make sure inflation doesn't become entrenched.
Right. And I'm way out of time, Jay, but so as a final question, if I can ask, a lot of economists are commenting that the effect so far of tariffs have been muted, that they haven't really seemed to impact data or prices as much as many economists originally thought. Do you think it's just a delayed reaction, or is this something that's actually just a matter of time before it comes to pass?
I think it is a little bit of a delayed reaction. I think a lot of businesses didn't want to have to raise prices initially, just given the flux that the whole tariff conversation has been in. It's a tax. Somebody's got to pay the higher tax. We haven't seen it. The president would argue that foreigners are going to pay for it. We haven't seen that in import prices. Import prices aren't going down at this point. If the foreigners were paying it, you would expect to see import prices going down. That's not happening. You're starting to see goods prices starting to accelerate. But when you look at the overall effect on the CPI at this point, what we're still seeing is disinflation as it relates to housing, which is that's a delayed reaction from before. That's like 33% of the overall CPI. So you are seeing some signs of it. It has been delayed. I think it's premature to say we're out of the woods in terms of higher inflation because of tariffs. So the next few months, I think, will be very telling.
All circles back to the Fed, according to you and according to me, doing the right thing and buying some time in order to see more data. To me, it makes the most logical sense. Sounds like to you too.
Correct. Yep.
Dr. Jay Bryson, former chief economist for Wells Fargo and at the Federal Reserve, and my great friend. We did learn a lot today. Thank you, Jay, so much. I hope you'll come back.
Thanks, Michael. Always a pleasure to be here.
Now, season 9 of the FarrCast, Jay. Season 9. Can you believe that? Amazing. That's it for another FarrCast, ladies and gentlemen, as we cover Wall Street, Washington, and the world, bringing you experts and insiders to better understand the data, what's going on the ground in Washington, and internationally. All of these things affect us here, our economy, and our investments. I learn a lot every week, and we thank you so much for joining us, for sharing us on your social media, for all the notes you send to hjennings at farmiller.com. Thanks so much on behalf of Harry, me, everybody, Hightower, Farr Miller. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week. In Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, I'm Michael Farr.
Thanks for being with us on this week's episode of the FarrCast. And thanks to our guests, Jim Iuorio, Dan Mahaffee, and special guest, Dr. J. Bryson. The FarrCast is produced by Michael Farr and Harry Jennings and comes to you weekly for free on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, TuneIn, and Apple Podcasts. Please be aware that anytime we or any of our guests mention a specific company, sector, or refer to performance in relation to an earnings report, news headline, or economic trend, it is not a recommendation to buy or sell. Review the risks and rewards of any investment with your financial advisor for what specific investment and general strategy is appropriate for you before you make any investment decision. And if we can be of assistance at Farr Miller in Washington, please reach out to me at hjennings@farmiller.com. We are here to help, and I'll be happy to put you in touch with one of our investment professionals to help you navigate your financial course across the changing investing environment. We are grateful for all of your notes and comments, and we try to respond to as many as we can. Please keep those emails and messages coming. We'll be back with you next week. Until then, take care, stay safe, and stay healthy. And before we go, I'll leave you with our special appearance by Kenny Polcari this week and the conclusion of The Great Shoe Incident. Thanks for listening to the FarrCast, Wall Street, Washington, and the world.
Special note for the FarrCast this morning, something that has caused me great concern. Whenever you see two friends, two very good friends, find a significant difference, really come at odds with each other. What am I talking about? I'm talking about some very ugly comments that were made yesterday about my friend Kenny Polcari, who appeared on Fox, as he does about 6 times a day now with Maria Bartiromo. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And he appeared in a suit, but he was wearing sneakers, suit and sneakers. It was criticized on X and Twitter. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, left field, comes Jim Iuorio saying, the Italians make nice shoes. Why can't he get some nice shoes? And this controversy got heated. You all can see that American civility is at stake here. So, live now, I've got Kenny Polcari and Jim Iuorio on the FarrCast. Kenny, what are you doing? Do you wear slippers? You know, there was that one guy who used to wander around in his bathrobe around Manhattan. Also was an Italian, I think, years ago.
Yeah, no, not me. I was fully dressed yesterday. I ran out early in the morning to go on Maria, got all dressed up, and I put on my nice fancy sneakers. They weren't just like used Nikes that I've had for 20 years. They were new fancy black sneakers. They looked good. I just wanted to be comfortable sitting behind the desk. I ended up meeting Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, which was a huge
Wait, you were wearing sneakers when you met the Treasury Secretary?
Well, I didn't know the Treasury Secretary was coming in for an interview. Next thing you know, Treasury Secretary's there. I stood up, had a nice conversation with him. I said, sir, can we take a picture? Yep. And they took this picture, and they got my sneakers in the picture. And so I put it out on Twitter, and of course, somebody's going to call me out on it.
Think of what you could have done for Italian Americans everywhere had you had a pair of Italian shoes on with the Treasury Secretary. But no, Iuorio, what's wrong? I mean, this is actually serious.
How much is in the clock till I get to rebuttal? Because I have about 2 minutes worth. Here's what I'm saying. Kenny, I understand your viewpoint to be comfortable. But based on that rationale, why not just wear sweatpants? You, as an older Italian-American man, has a responsibility toward fashion. There is one principle that I live by. It's what would Sinatra wear? Do you think Sinatra would be happy with you wearing sneakers like some 32-year-old just out of school? Do you think he'd be happy with that, Polcari?
No. And you know what? You're right. You're right. I should have known better. I should have been more Sinatra-like. And so after that,
when you bring up the name Sinatra, you tend to win debates with Italian men, right?
So now you've shamed me. I'm going to throw those sneakers out right now.
You could do the full
right now, and I'm just
and
wearing
go to
my Italian
sweatpants.
shoes. Wait, one quick thing, Jimmy. Did you see the guys when I said to the guy I was just trying to be comfortable?
Yeah.
Did you see his response?
No, what did he say?
He goes, I'm not trying to troll you, but he said you're highly respected, and you should be dressed to the nines. And I laughed. I said, well, thank you. I appreciate that. But I just wanted to be comfortable.
If
at
you had
5 o'clock
known
in the
that you were going to be on with the Treasury Secretary, would you have worn your
but my
fancy
feet were under the desk. No one even saw what I was wearing.
Oh, yeah,
I'm
they
with
did
you.
get your picture taken with the Treasury Secretary. For
I know. I
God's sake.
should have cut my feet out. That's what I should have done, but I didn't even think about it. One way or the other, it was pretty cool. It was pretty cool actually meeting him.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Are you two agree now to be friends?
No, we're back. Yeah, I think we've patched up all our differences.
I love Jimmy.
Ladies and
course,
gentlemen, the
of course.
FarrCast once again making America a better place.
Farr Miller in Washington is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, and SEC registered investment advisor. Some investment professionals may also be registered with Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. Securities are offered through Hightower Securities, LLC. All information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC have not independently verified the accuracy or completeness of the information contained in this podcast. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties, expressed or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions or results obtained from the use of this information. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC and any of its affiliates assume no liability for any action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to the information. This podcast and the materials contained herein were created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates. Farr Miller in Washington and Hightower Advisors, LLC or any of its affiliates do not provide tax or legal advice. This material was not intended or written to be used or presented in any way to any entity as tax or legal advice. Clients are urged to consult their tax and or legal advisors for related questions.